Hello and welcome to another episode of From Data to Dollars, a podcast about using AI in business, where we help you make sense of a fast-moving, exciting, and often bewildering field. I'm Gideon Lichfield, former editor-in-chief of MIT Technology Review and Wired.
And I'm Beinat, Global Head of Data Science and Artificial Intelligence for Prosus.
The way most people experience AI directly today is through chatbots like ChatGPT. But increasingly in the coming years, you're going to be hearing the term agentic AI, which refers to AI assistants or agents that we'll be using to manage many aspects of our lives. That's what we're talking about today. So I cheated a little bit on this assignment. I asked ChatGPT to help me prepare for the podcast. Mm-hmm. So I started out by asking, do you know Beinat? And it said, yes, Beinat is a notable figure, particularly in the fields of data science, artificial intelligence, and technology-driven innovation. And it gave me some background on you. And then I said that I was interviewing you about AI assistants, and I asked it to give me some questions. And it said I should ask things like what to expect in the next 5 or 10 years from AI technology, and how close we are to fully autonomous agents, or how to balance personalization with privacy. Then I asked it for questions that would give me a sense of you as a person. And it said I should ask you what thinkers or books have influenced you, what cultural interests you have that intersect with your work. So, fairly obvious questions, but not terrible, at least as a starting point for an interview. And this was ChatGPT, so GPT 3.5, not the most sophisticated versions that we already have today. So talk a little bit about how this is going to evolve in the next few years. If we're talking about chatbots, what kinds of things are going to become possible that I couldn't have done just now with ChatGPT?
Many things. First of all, it's, as you said, is maybe use 3.5, but if you use 4 or 4.0 other versions of these models that came out recently, and they're going to improve in the next few years, the answer would already be a lot better, right? Mm-hmm. More punchy if you want. Mm-hmm. So the question is more punchy, the context better understood. And so I think in general, going forward, there is a fair chance that what we're doing here today is going to be done by machines.
Okay.
Because they need to have, let's say, context. They need to know something about me. They need to know something about what we're going to talk about. And they, let's say, simulate voice in a credible way. So in a way, what we experience now, it is going to be very different from what we're going to experience in 1, 2, definitely a short amount of time.
Okay. So we hear terms bouncing around like chatbot, AI agent, AI assistant. What is the difference between them?
So chatbots have been around since computing was around. So there are small bars where you start typing something, you get an answer. Usually they've been very narrow. So do you have this pair of shoes in a certain e-commerce platform, or can I have this credit card in a banking site and so on? Most of the times they don't really work well. They didn't really work well, right? Mm-hmm. So, and then you have all the experience. You go to a place, you intercept a support agent, which is not an agent, but it's a machine, and you're unsatisfied. Give me a human first, right? Please, right? That has changed because language models became viable. Mm-hmm. So what we've seen in the last few years, assistants are, in terms of experience, similar to a chatbot. So you still interact in language, and increasingly it's going to be voice or the other ways. But let's say that you interact with language, but they're very general. Mm-hmm. So they understand many more things. They're very broad. So you don't have a narrow use case. You can use them for hundreds of use cases. That's a big difference because instead of training one model for every single use case, now you can have one model that supports many, many use cases. But it's still a Q&A, right? Mm-hmm. I ask a question, give me an answer. Agents can perform tasks based on tools. So instead of, let's say, just giving you the answer, they can take your question, break it down in steps, figure out what tools they have available. They can browse the web, for instance. They can use a credit card or other things. And they perform the entire end-to-end, so they give you something. So in e-commerce, for instance, instead of searching for a pair of shoes, you say, deliver to me tomorrow the pair of shoes for the run for next, let's say, week. Mm-hmm. So that requires a number of steps. So this is essentially an evolution from chatbots, very simple, which become very general through assistants. And these assistants, they become agentic.
Okay, so where are we in the development timeline roughly for agentic AI?
Agentic AI is already a reality. So we have developed in-house an agent called Tokan, which is fully based on agents. At the same time, these tools are extremely complex. So I think we are at the very early stage of this development. It's already useful. It's already usable, but it's still very early stage.
Can you talk briefly about what it takes to build an agent like Tokan?
So maybe I start by giving you a little bit of a background why we built Tokan in the first place. We wanted to give to every associate, every colleague in our company, so it's about 25,000 people, tools to experiment with generative AI firsthand. And then we wanted also to give these tools to be privacy preserving, to be protected, to have guardrails, but also to be very broad in such a way that you can experiment not only with language, but also with code, with browsing the web through these tools and so on. So that was the reason why we decided to build a tool like that. So if you have this, let's say, design parameters, then you design in a certain way. That means it has to have 20 models underneath, and then it has to be able to choose which ones. It has to be accessible in the places where people work. In our case, most people use Slack, so it is a tool that lives in Slack and so on. So these are our own, let's say, design parameters. Others have different design parameters that do it in a different way. But our assistant was designed initially to be very broad, to enable everybody to experiment, learn, and create use cases with Gen AI.
Okay. So what makes it distinct from the tools that are publicly available, like ChatGPT, Claude, all of these other chatbots? What did you need to make different?
So we have designed this with a few specific needs. The first one, we want to control. We want to protect the end-to-end. We need to be absolutely sure that the data that people use, upload, or the questions that they make to the tool are absolutely private, right? So it means that you can't use it cannot be seen by anybody. You can't use this data for training anything. So that's the first thing. The second, we have, let's say, our nature in terms of technology company. It means that about 40-50% of our colleagues are engineers. So it has to support tools that engineers use, first of all. So it has to be good at coding. It has to be good at designing the products and so on. So these are specific, very specific needs. And the third one, the reason why we built it is these tools change all the time. The underlying models change all the time. And we want to give to everybody working with these tools the best implementation that helps them. So we can't be dependent on third parties. It's fine that we use external models, GPT-4 or Claude or all the others, but the way people consume them and use them, well, we know them better than anybody else. So we want to give them that opportunity, and therefore we need to control the entire stack.
Right. So what will agentic AI look like for someone like me? Like, will I have one agent that goes out into the world and does all the things I need? Will I have different agents for different tasks?
It's very hard to say at this point in time because, as I said before, agents are already practical, useful, but it's very early on. There are a few things that we see in any case, and they might be, let's say, pointing to where we are going to be in 2-3 years. First of all, you will have assistants based on agents everywhere, and they do general things, horizontal things, and then every tool, any platform, any tool that you use will have that possibility. But they're typically, at least everything that we know so far, is that they won't be sufficiently good for specific tasks. They won't be sufficiently good for education. They won't be sufficiently good for shopping and so on. So there will be most likely a variety of these assistants based on agents which are specialized on, let's call them vertical tasks, workflows. And if that's the case, you might have many of those.
So like one for booking travel, one for, I don't know, doing my shopping, one for giving me advice on real estate.
For now, this is what we see, that you need to have, let's say, different ones. However, that looks like very quickly, well, it can develop either in the same way that you have websites from different things now, right? Therefore, you will have agents for different things. But agents talk to each other. So, and therefore, you should assume that there's going to be some form of coalition of agents that know who you are and then give you, let's say, better experience for e-commerce, for instance. Right? So there probably are going to be some clusters of some form. What shape that will have, everybody's experimenting, but we don't really have an answer to that.
That makes it sound almost a little creepy. They're all talking about me behind my back.
They don't have bad intentions, right? In general, they are designed to serve you, right? But yes, they will do it.
Yeah. Can you talk a bit more about what it looks like then, what it will look like to use these agents in the workplace? What are some specific things that people might be doing at work with agents in a few years' time that they're not doing now?
Well, I can tell you first what they do now, because that's, I guess, it's a pointer. So our assistant is used by about, say, 20,000 people. About half of them, more than half, use it continuously. That has become ingrained in the way that we work, the way that I work. So I never start anything, a presentation, an interview, or any other thing without consulting Tokan first. Right? That becomes ingrained in the way that we work. Because of the nature of our group and then the activities that we do, about 45% of the interactions with Tokan are technical. So it has to do with software, it has to do with systems, it has to do with installations and all this. And they have hundreds of use cases where they use it. So, for instance, it's going to be to fix a bug in software, to figure out how to introduce a new technology in their day-to-day. Some people use it to learn. So there's an extremely nice example. I really like it because there's a colleague that has joined our team recently and is really great at a certain set of development languages, but some of the tools that we use are in a different language. So then you have two options. Either you go the traditional way, you take an entire, let's say, training for that, or you use the assistant on the job to learn as you do things.
Right.
Now, his assessment is that it would have taken him a few months to be proficient in this new language. Is sort of working already in 2 weeks, right? From 3 months for 2 weeks. So that's something that we didn't really expect. We didn't design the tool for that.
Yeah.
But people figure out you can do it, and then they stretch the tool in different directions, many different directions. So we see a lot of that.
That's interesting. So it's kind of like instead of, for me, I've lived in different countries. Rather than going and spending months learning a language, first I get like a very basic grounding, and then I go and live in the country and talk to people, and that's the way that I absorb it the best. So it sounds like there's something
for sure.
here.
Of course, in this particular case, in the case of translation, you already know that there's going to be real-time voice translations, which in fact preempt the need for you to learn. But it is one of the use cases for sure. Yeah. And the way that we use it is, which is also a little bit strange. We operate in about 100 countries in the world. Therefore, the system and the services that we have are in different languages. And some are mainstream, English and Spanish. Some others are languages which are more local and so on. Normally, if you want to deal with the content in a certain place, you need to know the language. Right? It's very hard to deal with, let's say, e-commerce sites if you don't know what's the language by which objects and services are described. That's not the case anymore. So we develop everything with Tokan, and everything it is translated in real time, everything. So developers, they can only handle language in English, right? They can develop tools which are going to be in a completely different setting. So that's useful, very useful. This is one degree of freedom that you have.
Yeah. So I have this kind of prejudice about AI at the moment, which is that it seems to be good for giving people small productivity boosts in very specific tasks. So like you said, you're preparing for a podcast, or I'm preparing for a podcast, and it might give me an initial list of questions, but then I have to go through and add and edit and, use my own intelligence. You're preparing a presentation. Again, it maybe gives you a basic template, but then you have to spend a lot of time building on that. So maybe it saved you a little time, but not that much. Are there any ways in which you think that AI assistants and agents are already or will make much more meaningful transformative changes to how we work?
Let me first push back on this saving of a little time.
Okay.
Because what we see after 2 years of deploying Tokan at scale, we collect a lot of data about users, we interview people, we have debriefs, and we measure also productivity in numerical terms, right? So you see that on average, that means across the entire organization, not only software, but also say marketing, but also legal and so on, we save about 1 hour per day for every employee using it. Now, you can say that 1 hour per day is not a revolution, but it makes a big difference at this scale. So that's the first thing that, we didn't really know that when we started. We assumed that was the case, but this is what we measured at this point in time. The other thing, and then you're absolutely right, is the expectation we had at the beginning. So when we started, we had the naive expectation that a certain portions of workflow would disappear, right? So you can automate entire piece of work. We haven't seen that everywhere. We have seen it only in a few places, and a few places are customer support and some parts of software development. Everywhere else, you have micro productivity bursts. Right? These micro productivity bursts, however, over time tend to cluster. People figure out that these tools are good at something, less good at other things, and they tend to stretch them. When we see them, we produce more functionality for where it works. And one example of that is data analyst. So every organization, technical organization like us, collects a lot of data about transactions, products, and so on, right? And it is typically in a data lake. It is really detailed. So if we could leverage this data, if everybody could leverage this data to make decisions, that would make a big difference for the organization. However, normal way of accessing this data is either through dashboards. So it is packaged and you can see trends or sales and all the other things. Or you have analysts. Analysts are people that know the data. You go to them, hey, I need to find out why this order yesterday was delayed and so on. Can you tell me everything behind? That is usually a friction point. Okay. So it means that you don't really have the answers to the things that you want when you need.
Because you have to wait for a human being to do it.
You have to wait for a human being, or perhaps you don't have it. It's not in the dashboard. So you need it now, you get it in 3 days. But that's not necessary, because if you can write everything in English, what you want, and we can use AI to translate what you want into SQL, and it goes into database and comes back with the answer that you want, essentially in real time, then you make this data accessible to everybody, it democratizes. So we have seen over time, early on, that people were trying to do that. We're trying to do that with LLMs, with GPT-4 and so on, and it works sort of 80%, right? But if you have a tool that gives you an error 5 times, you don't use it. Right?
Yeah.
So we figured out how to go from the 80% to 99%. And at that point, everybody uses the data assistant for getting data from data lakes. That's a big difference.
How did you get from 80% to 99% accuracy?
Super interesting question. First of all, it took us a year to figure it out.
Okay.
Right? And we had another naive assumption that this was a question of technology, right? In fact, it is not. So if you have the question very well formulated in English, it is almost trivial to translate it in SQL, get the answer back. It is understanding the context. Right? So if I ask you, what were the top orders in Berlin yesterday? What do I mean with Berlin? Is it the city center? Is it the municipality? Is it the boundary of the urban area? What is it? This is a trivial example, but you have hundreds of those. So the way that we communicate has a certain degree of context, a certain degree of ambiguity that we between people, deal with and solve through conversation. A machine needs to be helped for doing that. So we spent a lot of time doing 2 things: disambiguating what people wanted, figuring out their context such a way when I say Berlin, I know exactly what I mean without asking, but also working on the data. The data itself, frequently it is described and structured such a way that engineers know what's in there. But now you don't have engineers, right? So you have to make sure that the metadata, if you want, of this database is correct. So we use also AI to find out what the data looks like, what metadata is there. And then, yes, once you have solved these 2 things, then you can really take a question, break it down in parts, figure out which tables, which databases have the answer, combine and give back. So that takes a lot of time, and working with the companies that do this.
Is it also a question of training the humans to write prompts in the right way?
100%.
Okay.
Maybe not prompts, but training the humans to understand that the way that the machines work in a specific way.
Yeah.
Right? So you ideally you would just don't care about that, right? And it might well be that we won't care about that in some time. And that might be for 2 reasons, either because machines get better or because we got so used to thinking in the way machines think that we don't care anymore, right?
Right, which I feel like we already have done with search. Like we unconsciously use a certain syntax when we're doing Google searches.
Absolutely.
That wasn't natural at the beginning, but now everybody knows how to do it.
That's absolutely the case. So we will do the same. We're already doing the same with prompting. We're already doing the same in so many nice examples that come out from using this assistant. For instance, one of the things that we discovered, which becomes a good practice, when you ask something to the assistant and the response that you get is so-so, right? So it's not ideal. So what do? You ask the assistant itself, hey, listen, this answer was inferior to my expectation. Can you explain why it was inferior to my expectation? Right? That prompts the tool to self-reflect. Right?
Okay.
And by doing that, it comes back saying, because this, that reason, and then it does it again and does it better. So these are patterns that you discover by doing, and they make a difference. So when we started 2 years ago, we released the assistant to the first group of users. We found out that there was a lot of, let's say, negative comment. Well, it was not a lot, but they were frequent. So we introduced an icon. It's an icon so where you can give feedback. So you can imagine you can say thumbs up is great, thumbs down is not good, heart is really good. And then we introduced Pinocchio.
Oh, Pinocchio is like, it's lying.
It's lying. So you're lying to me. You're making things up, right? So back then, it was summer 22, I think. We had about 10% of Pinocchios. So 1 in 9.
Yeah.
You can't really use it because it is, let's say, it makes things up. And then over time, this went down to something like 1% or a little bit less. This is where we are now. Reasons are models got better. We trained the tool better. So we make sure that you have guardrails around that. But users got better. So they figure out where to go, where not to go, and how to ask the question in such a way that you have a higher chance to get in there. So this is, let's say, a little bit what happened.
Yeah. What are the pitfalls? What can go wrong when people are using agents?
Well, a number of things. So sometimes the way that we describe this is like having a Ferrari engine on a Cinquecento, Fiat Cinquecento. Right? I grew up in Italy, so my Italian car analogies. So a Ferrari engine in a Fiat Cinquecento, driving on a mountain road full of bends, sharp bends. There are no guardrails, right? And the driver doesn't have a driving license.
Okay, it sounds terrifying already.
Well, it sounds that there are many things that you need to make sure you improve such a way that everything goes well, right? So first of all, the engine and the car have to be compatible. That means the applications have to use the right models in the right way. Instead of riding in the sharp bend roads with sharp bends, why don't you take highways first? The use cases which are predictable, that work well there. You need to make sure that you have the right protections, no private information in these tools, no training. If you have something that goes wrong, you capture it before you actually respond. And finally, you have to train users in a systematic way over a long period of time, which we found to be probably, of all the things here, the one that determines success in a more predictable way.
That's interesting. Okay, so in other words, don't try to run before you can walk. Make sure that you're putting all of the processes in place and learning as you go.
It's not rocket science, in fact.
Right. Yeah. How close are we to this kind of agent being a reality, not just for companies that specialize in technology, but for the average person? I mean, Bill Gates at one point, I think, said that the winner of the AI race will be the one who builds a successful personalized AI assistant. So how close are we to that for the average person?
We're not there yet. Right? So where we are now is as AI assistant that use agents, but in fact, you cannot just pick up the phone and say, hey, or say, reserve a ticket for me tomorrow, and I need to be in that place. I also need an hotel and transportation, so I'll just get it done for me, right? That's something that will definitely be feasible. The components of those type of use cases are all there. The combination is not reliable enough. It's the same problem we described before about going from language to structured data, right? So a lot of the things that I'm asking are not sufficiently clear. The context is not clear and so on. So that is going to take some time. What you will see, and everybody will see much faster than that, it is agents that do specific things. So an agent that helps you with healthcare, an agent that helps you with condition and training, an agent that helps you shopping for sure, right? But shopping within a specific environment and so on. If you go forward, and then I'm not sure how long, but let's say a few years, we know that the unit cost of intelligence tends to go to zero. Intelligence in terms of machine intelligence, right? So when that unit cost of intelligence tend to go to zero, you will use a lot more of that. And the obvious way to use it is to train machines to perform complex tasks. So it's almost inevitable that this is going to happen. And obviously the one that can do it better than others have a phenomenal advantage. So the premise is probably correct.
You said the unit cost goes to zero, but it doesn't completely go to zero, right? Because you need to have data centers, you need to have energy use.
Of course. Tends to zero. I mean, that's the direction of right? But you can get a lot more intelligence for the same amount of money that you did, let's say, a year ago. Maybe twice as much, right?
Right.
And it's going to be the same in a few years. So yes, it's never going to go to zero. But you will have intelligence on top, right? In the same way that you have computing on top now from the cloud, you will have intelligence on top, right? And you will use it everywhere. It becomes the operating system for all the applications. So the operating system is not going to be, let's say, code, but it's going to be intelligence, in fact.
Let's talk a bit more about those costs, though, because clearly, yes, the amount of intelligence that you get per dollar, per unit of energy is going to go down. At the moment, I think a query to ChatGPT costs about 10 times as much power as a Google search. And obviously, this requires, we're going to see a big increase in the amount of data centers that are needed, the amount of energy to power them, the amount of water to cool them. I think there was some Goldman Sachs estimate that said that by 2030, we're going to see a 160% increase in the computing power that we need. What do you think about the environmental sustainability questions around this?
So this is one of the areas where people are spending most time and energy to it's a clear issue, right? So we know that these are new tools. They are consuming much more compute than they used in the past. And therefore, the entire, let's say, cloud providers are moving in ways that, you can reduce the environmental footprint by using different forms of energy, shaping the way where you actually tap this computing from. From the point of view of the user, there are many things that we see now, and we see how it goes. For instance, one of the trends that we see is that, yes, the cost of an answer goes down. So it means that the underlying infrastructure gets much more efficient. And by becoming much more efficient, also the environmental impact is going to be, let's say, less. At the same time, however, agents tend to use much more of that. So if you just ask a question to a large language model and an answer, there's going to be one computing stage, and then you get the answer. But agents need to get the question that you have, they break them down in parts, execute every single part, combine the thing, come back, actually reflect whether the answer was correct or not, maybe rerun the whole loop several times until this is done. That process at this moment is inefficient, right? But we know that, right? And we know also how to make it much more efficient. So at this point in time, you see a decrease in costs, the unit cost, but you use a lot more of these units. So in fact, the cost for answer tends to go slightly up. But you will see that coming down in the next 12 months because we know how to optimize all this process.
Right. How do we handle data privacy issues when we're using agents? Because at the moment, let's say you use ChatGPT or one of these bots, and probably OpenAI is capturing the data that you type into it and doing its own training on that. When you're using an agent, it's not just the chatbot that you're interacting with, but all the other services that it's connecting to that are now getting data. And that data could be used in ways that you honestly have no idea where it's going. So it seems to make the data privacy nightmare that we already live even worse. Is there anything we can do about that?
Well, we don't do things that way. Right? So first of all, the entire channel from the moment you ask a question to the point where a model responds is protected. So
At Prosus, yes.
Yeah. Well, many other organizations will go down the same route. Okay. So you can't use any of these interactions for doing anything else but answering to what you ask. So there's no training for that. There are no leakage and so on. Now you have to take that. You have to organize for that. So make sure that, for instance, if you use third party, there are contracts. And if you don't trust these third parties, then you have to use models in-house. Open source becomes very, very handy for that. So the state of the art at this moment is still private models. So Claude or GPT-4 or Gemini and so on. But the llamas and all the other open source models are getting very, very close. And those models, you can host them the way that you prefer in your own data center and so on. So at that point, you have the entire end-to-end stack in your hands, and you decide the rules of the game. And the rules of the game is total privacy, no training, no leakage, and so on. So this is now a question of choice.
All right. So you've been building Tokan in-house at Prosus for a while. What do you think it will be capable of doing? What's its development roadmap in the next few years?
We are going to enable specific workflows. So the what we have seen is that horizontal assistants based on agents are extremely helpful to give people freedom to test, find out how it works. We see people inventing use cases and so on. But then you get to the point in which, well, I need to solve an entire problem, and this tool gives me 30%, 40% of that. So you start seeing verticalized versions of these assistants, agents, which are designed for lawyers, which are designed for software developers, which are designed for educators, and so on. And they capture a lot of the knowledge and a lot of the, let's say, context and insights for these use cases. We are very lucky because we have about 100 companies and we serve about 2 billion consumers globally. And these companies see all the things that you need to know to be able to figure out what are the features, in what ways these vertical assistants need to go. So I think for us, it is going to be much better verticalization, such a way that you can really, let's say, the micro bursts of productivity, they will be clustered and you really have major bursts of productivity.
Yeah. Let's take a concrete example, like lawyers. How will their work change?
Well, everything that has to do with content will change. So there are a number of workflows that lawyers use, which have to do with checking if a document has a certain clause, verifying if a contract is similar or different from another version of the contract, figuring out if this document has implications for some of the way that we work. There's an enormous amount of content work. And then, of course, there's that's equally important, other part of work, which is about creativity, figuring out how to set up, let's say, a new contract and so on. The first part, which is content processing, that can be largely helped and supported by these assistants. And at this moment is done by typically junior lawyers or paralegal associates that support this process, right? So this can be made 10 times faster, 10 times more efficient.
Yeah. What would be your advice to CEOs or to companies now that are thinking about starting to implement agents in their operations?
We learn so much by experimenting that I think that would be my advice. So the reason why back in 2022, we decided to release this tool to everybody, and that was before ChatGPT. Right? So in fact, we saw that, and it was pretty obvious that there was a lot of value in having these tools. And after ChatGPT came out, many organizations said, don't touch this thing because there's leakage of data and, stay away from that. We did exactly the opposite.
Okay.
We say, put the right protections around that. Make sure that the tools you use are useful for type of work that you do. And make sure that people experiment as much as possible.
Yeah.
So we spent a lot of time making sure that people use this tool as much as they can, as frequent as they can, right? And make all mistakes and learn from that, because that's key.
How did you have to overcome resistance there?
You have to overcome skepticism, because if you just give a tool, the first 3 days they make a poem about the cat, which is not very useful. Right? And then they sort of getting stuck in the loop. Poor question, poor answer. Right? So you need to educate users to use these tools well. And our experience is that it takes, for an organization, which means for all users of the organization, close to 6 months from the moment you have the tool available to the moment that you can see people are using the tool in ways which are unexpected. The sense that, they know how it works, it is there, they just stretch it in all possible ways. And there you need workshops, you need use cases, you need hackathons, you need individual training, you need to share use cases. A lot of that needs to happen, doesn't happen by itself. So that's the process. So experiment and guide the experimentation.
Yeah. So this is already becoming something of a competitive landscape, right? What other products and tools already exist out there?
There are plenty. And so we use our own assistant, and the reasons why we use our own assistant is, let's say, because we need control of the stack, we need security, we need to have specific features and so on. But people around in the organization, they use dozens of other tools. They use copilots for coding. They use ChatGPT for simpler tasks. They use Gemini. They use and many, many others, because now you can see that, let's say, almost every platform that people use for doing that work have some sort of assistant. So our perspective in this is very simple. What we really care is that people are really good at using these tools to do their work. They're really good at creating, let's say, products and services for e-commerce, for instance, that are better than anybody else. So for doing that, you use the best tools that you have out there. So Tokan serves a specific purpose, but we encourage using of any other tool as much as we can in any case.
Yeah. Okay, Euro, well, thank you for a fascinating discussion. I'm looking forward to our next interview, which will be written entirely by my AI assistant.
Let's work on that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.